It is now 4:12 here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and of course we have people from all over the US in various time zones. We have people in Scotland and other parts of the UK here where it's currently 9 p.m. We have people on the West Coast where it's 1:12 p.m. We have, I think we have at least one person in Australia, if she made it in to the event, where it's about 4:12 a.m. tomorrow, I believe. So welcome to everyone everywhere in all time zones. There are a lot of familiar names and faces here, so forgive me for not mentioning everybody by name. Again, of course, we have Jeff Gales, the director of the US Lighthouse Society. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Jeremy D'Entremont. I'm the US Lighthouse Society historian and host of the Society's podcast, Lighthearted. And it is a pleasure to introduce the first of these US Lighthouse Society tour presentations, where we're going to take a look at some of the memorable Society tours that have taken place in past years. And we plan to offer more of these presentations with Chris Brookes and other presenters, other people who've led some of these tours in the past years. The US Lighthouse Society's tours are one of the really unique and special things that the Lighthouse Society offers. The tours not only provide a great way to visit lighthouses that are often difficult or impossible to reach for the general public, but they're also a great way to experience historical and cultural sites while enjoying the company of other lighthouse enthusiasts. I've been lucky enough to take part in some of the New England tours that the Society has run in recent years. And also I took part in an England and Scotland tour in 2017, and it was amazing. So I know firsthand how great these tours are. Today's presenter again is Chris Brookes. And again, these tours are really special. And from all accounts, Chris Brookes is a very special tour planner and guide. Chris is originally from England and is a resident of Bainbridge Island near Seattle, Washington. He's led a number of the US Lighthouse Society's international tours in the past several years, including the one in the Outer Hebrides in Scotland in 2015 that he's going to tell us about today. It was my pleasure to interview Chris for my podcast when I was in Washington in January of last year. So at this point, let me turn things over to Chris.
Thank you, Jeremy. Well, welcome. I'm delighted that everybody could come and join Jonathan and myself on this armchair adventure to the Outer Hebrides. This is very much a journey of the Stevenson lighthouses. This is entirely Stevenson country. And we had a fabulous time 5 years ago. It's a journey to northern latitudes. Our journey starts in Oban, as you'll see. And Oban is the latitude of Ketchikan, Alaska. And this is also where I have discovered for the first time Zoom. And I've often felt that it was a little sad that we had this great adventure and only a dozen of us could share it. I tend to take small group adventures to some amazing and crazy places, but there's only room so often for a limited number of people. I hope to talk for about 35 minutes, and we're going to start. We started in Glasgow, trained to Oban. And from Oban, the original journey was out of Oban to Tobermory. And from Tobermory, we'd go look at Ardna Merchant, and then out across the Minch to Heisker, which is a major lighthouse, and Canna, and then down to Mingley and up and around Skye. The problem, we got to Oban, and we hadn't been gone probably 20 minutes when Mark Henry, the skipper, came to me and said, look, we've got a little bit of a problem here. We're coming out to Tobermory and planning to go out into the Minch and these remote islands, and we happen to have a force 7 to 8 gale coming in. And we may be able to get to Canna, but once we get to Canna, the odds are we're going to be stuck for 2 days, in that it's a 50-mile leg from Canna down to Mingulay, and force 7, force 8, that's 75-mile-an-hour winds, is not something we want to be even attempting to deal with. My rule of thumb is maximum force 4 for journeying, which is about 20, 25 miles an hour. And the last thing I wanted to do also was to be stuck here for 2 days, because we're on a 12-day journey. And if I'm here for 2 days, I don't have enough time to complete our journey around Skye. So the first question is, what are we going to do about this? And then I'm a boater from many, many years. And when faced with winds of that nature, there are only two solutions. I either run like hell or go and hide. And the option that I saw was the chance to go and hide by, instead of going clockwise on our journey, go anti-clockwise. So come out here and then head northeast up into the, towards Kyle of Lacouche. And this is exactly what we did. So this, thanks to Mary, who has been very kindly helped with all the maps, this is the revised journey. During this little talk, I'm going to be showing you this map 3 times, because I want to first talk about what I'll call the central part of our journey. The second part, I'm going to be talking about the south. And then later on, we flew to Stornoway and northern parts of the Isle of Lewis. Now, repeat the map at that point. So without much more ado, let's start in Glasgow. I grew up in the Midlands, and Glasgow at that time was a hard-working, hard-driving, hard-drinking city. I was a little nervous of it. It had somewhat of a rough reputation. And I thought, well, is this a good place to start a tour? But I have to tell you, Glasgow has totally cleaned up, lovely museums, but the wildlife is a little interesting when you get into Glasgow. It's really a fun place and a great place to start. But for us, the journey starts with the Hjelmabjørg boat. This is Captain Mark Henry and his lovely wife Anna's ship, based in Oban, Scotland, formerly a Norwegian rescue ship. And it has cabins that'll hold about 12 people. The living quarters are all, the dining and entertainment areas here, obviously a pilot house. This is our home, and this here on the back is our taxi. Almost everywhere we went, there's nobody. It's just a beach or a rock. And so invariably we have to get to that point, pull in, and use the Zodiac to get us ashore. My first view of Hjelmabjørg was, we arrived in Oban, this is Oban, and I came to the pier, and the tide was well out. They must have about a 10 or 15 foot tide in Oban. It was huge. And I couldn't see the ship. All I could see was this top deck. And all ships, there's never space to put anything. And I looked down at the top deck where the Zodiac was and lockers are, and there were all these cases and cases of Diet Coke. In that we had 2 passengers aboard this journey who love Diet Coke, and I had very strict instructions as to the copious quantities of Coke that was needed, and I figured out we needed about a dozen cases of Coke. In the email, I happened to talk about two people wanting Coke, and we had a little bit of a mix-up, and instead of buying a dozen cases of Diet Coke, this top deck was covered in 24 cases of Diet Coke. The fun of a journey. We left, the skies are dark. We headed out from Oban, and the first lighthouse we come to very quickly is Lismore. Lismore was declared no longer required about when 1988. She's gone into private hands and clearly is very well looked after. This was an Alan Stevenson lighthouse built in 1849. We couldn't stop, it's private. And so we ventured on to Tobermory. Tobermory, delightful little town. I should add, in this whole part of the world, there are only two towns of any size. That's Oban, where we started, and Stornoway, where we finished. Here we have Tobermory, very small, delightful little place. I have to say, excuse me, we got going, and the nice thing is we got there before their very famous distillery was closed, so we did get to sample a little bit of the malt scotch there. Tobermory we wanted to get from Tobermory across to the other side of the peninsula, across the sound there, and the skipper had told me some weeks before that he couldn't take the boat over there, in that one, it was a dangerous shore. The holding was bad, except for one little area where a ferry pulled in, and whilst he could anchor there, it was not something he really wanted to do. So the only way of getting the tour group to Ardna Merchant that morning, get everybody up nice and early, we caught the 8 o'clock ferry across to t'other side. Now, Ardna Merchant Lighthouse is about 4 or 5 miles away from where the ferry drops us. And I'd had terrible trouble communicating with the lighthouse keeper saying, I need to get some help. We're in remote country, there's no such thing as a bus or a taxi. You've got to somehow get rides, and I've got a dozen or more people I need to get up there. Couldn't get any answers. I finally got a hold of a local B&B and expressed my concern to the lady and said, how the heck do I get people to the lighthouse, and how do I get this lighthouse person to talk to me? I got a very quick response back. She said, don't you worry about that. The lighthouse keeper is my ex, and I'll sort him out. So she very kindly got us all from the ferry up the lighthouse and back in time. But from Tobermory, the storm is approaching, and we needed to hightail it north and get in behind Skye and the Coolin Mountains. On our way out of Tobermory, we come to Rudnagangal. This is a Thomas and David Stevenson lighthouse built in 1857. The cottages at the back here, these are the former keepers' cottages, and they sold in 2013 for about $265,000. And it's now, again, you can stay there for a week or a weekend, but as in so many of these lighthouses in Scotland, they've had to form charities that earn an income from rental of cottages and the like to keep the place going. Ardna Merchant, which is the one I really want to get to. This is a beautiful Egyptian-style lighthouse. You can see the fluting at the top. Again, we got there. This is built in 1847 by Alan Stevenson. And the nice thing is, this lighthouse, this beautiful granite from that island, sort of a pink granite, it's never been painted. It really is exquisite. The only tragedy is that they came to decommission the lighthouse and started stripping things out. So there isn't, in the building itself, we could go to the top, but there are not any of the former mechanics. But we found in these houses a lot of the old components, including a #1 Fresnel lens, beautiful lens, which is a delight in that so many of these lighthouses, the lens has been shipped off to other corners of the world. From Ardna Merchant, it was the run north up to, I've lost my notes here. Eiley and Chatale. This is a late one. This lighthouse was actually built in 1906. It's on just off the island of Egg. Very difficult to access from the land in that it's actually an island off an island. But we couldn't linger in that the bad weather was approaching. We had to get to Ornsay. This is Ornsay, a beautiful island. It's built in 1857 also by David and Thomas Stevenson. We came around the corner and anchored in a little cove, had a chance to get up and walk around. Unfortunately, we couldn't get in. At the time, these cottages were also under renovation, the keepers' cottages, and clearly, I would say by now, they are holiday homes. But there is another story here. And this was, there was a rather famous author, Gavin Maxwell, who we'll come to in a minute, who loved this corner of the world. And he originally lived here. Gavin Maxwell is famous for his otters and the story Ring of Bright Water, and there's also a movie called Ring of Bright Water. But this is not where he filmed that, this is where he lived originally. From here, it was a run up the east side of Skye to Eilean-Donnan. Eilean-Donnan is an amazing castle. Built, people have lived here for almost 1,000 years, hundreds of years. Back in 1719, with the Jacobite rebellion, it was completely destroyed. It was just a ruin. And it remained a ruin for pretty well 200 years. In 1910, this is Mackenzie and McCrae country, very much a McCrae castle and clan. And Farquhar McCrae in 1910 said, we need to rebuild. It took him 20 years. 20 years later, in the 1930s, it was opened. It's not that big. It's a keep and a side. It's probably one of the most famous castles to view in Scotland. And the setting is absolutely incredible. Just along the road from this castle, by Kylie King, is Kylie King. Kylie King is a beautiful, very small lighthouse built also by David and Thomas Stevenson in 1857. But unfortunately, it's a little sad, I think, at the moment, in that this is not a mistake on my photograph with a strap across the top. The bridge to Skye is built directly over the top of this poor little lighthouse. I think the setting is glorious, but for me, a lighthouse living under a bridge doesn't quite cut it, and it is actually decommissioned and not very much use today. From here, this is where the weather turned really bad on us, and we decided at that point we were protected because of the mountains. We had the rain, but we weren't getting the severe gale force winds, so we could make a run for it. And we ran all the way around to the north coast of Skye and came into this wide, giant fjord, and which we narrowed and narrowed and narrowed until we got to Dunvegan Castle. Prior to this journey, I had never really knew much about Dunvegan, but Dunvegan has been the home to the MacLeod clan for over 800 years. One ownership, one clan ownership for a very long period of time. The house was glorious, the gardens were glorious, and the amazing the people you find in the gardens as you wander around. There's one of Phil by the waterfalls at the back of the garden. From Dunvegan, we came out back around the very northwest coast of Skye to Nest Point. Nest Point, fortunately, it had been very foggy, very rainy, but the clouds opened up for us enough that we were able to see Nest Point. Nest Point was built in 1909, fairly late, by David Stevenson. But 30 or 40 years later, the Northern Lighthouse Board concluded this whole thing was in great danger of collapse, the whole lighthouse. And they could do without it. And so they decided to sell it off. It went into a trust who've done a great deal of work shoring things up, making it very attractive and nice. I don't know that I would want to live there. At some point, this thing, I think, is going to end up down the cliff. We've now reached the northern tip of Skye, and we've got to cross over to the Isle of Lewis, the northern tip of the Outer Hebrides. And once we got there, we anchored at Ushenish. The group probably wanted to kill me at this point, in that I announced the hike to the lighthouse was at least 2 miles and very wet, boggy trail. And you can see, I enlarge this thing, you can see how we all, let me do this. This is how we all got off the boat. It's over the side into the dinghy, and move on and clamber on the sands. But it was a long, long slog. And when we get there, they're having to do fairly major repairs. It's very difficult to see. And the sad thing is it was probably better to see the lighthouse from the water, which we did later on. But this photograph gives you a sense of the remoteness. They're on the island, they're on an Isle of Lewis, large island. There is no road access to lighthouses like this. From Ushenish, this was built in 1857 by David and Thomas Stevenson. From there, we traveled to magical Mingulay. Mingulay, we got there late afternoon. We anchored there for the night. And Mingulay to me was one of the most incredible stops of our journey. Not totally surprised, and I had read about it from other people's journals. The cliffs, these cliffs, that side and this side, are full of rabbit holes, which have all been enlarged by the puffins. As you hiked and wandered around Mingulay, you got buzzed. They would form up in little squadrons of 10, 20 birds, and they were not happy as we hiked up. We landed, it was a shore landing. This is the group, first group, Janet, Anna, Dick, and Ken. Just a wonderful place to hike. But this island had been inhabited for literally thousands of years. But in the early part of the century, in the 1800s, population started to rapidly decline as the young people of the island saw that they didn't have to live the hard crofter's life. They could go ashore and they could get jobs. And population slid and slid. And then in 1910, they were down to 142 people on the island. And the order was given to abandon. It took them a couple of years to fully abandon it. But these people lived hard, simple lives. But what struck me is they understood some things about aerodynamics. When you look at their houses, they had this is a very windy spot, and their houses were all rounded corners, so the harsh winds didn't batter the houses so much. It went round. Small group of us then went from there to the top, and whereas it's a sandy shore on one side, it's very steep cliffs on the far side. Following morning, we're up early, and we're heading for Barra Head. I have to admit that this is a cheat shot in that we came around the corner. Landing is not a beach at Barra Head. It's a somewhat rocky headland where they've chiseled out steps. The storm had passed, but there's still quite a swell. Didn't like the look of it, and I think the group were still feeling sore from my 2-mile hike, and the thought of climbing a 500-foot cliff to get up for one more lighthouse, I think, was a little more than they wanted to do. But this was always a Robert Stevenson house in 1833. So we've now come out, we've gone up, and we've gone all around Skye, and we're down here at Barra Head, Mingulay. Because of that wet, rainy day, we'd actually traveled around here a lot faster than we had planned if we were going the other way. And the skipper at this point said, you know, instead of us going the route back that we planned to up to Heiska and in, we have time to do some other things. Why don't we go to Skerryvore? The two most iconic lighthouses in Scotland are Skerryvore and Bell Rock on the east coast. I gave everybody the vote. I asked, do you want to go to Skerryvore or do you want to go on the original journey? The unanimous decision, let's go to Skerryvore. From Skerryvore, he said we would go into Tiree, Airaid, and then off here is a lighthouse, Dubiatach. Our skipper said, don't ask me to go there. It's just too far. But, you know, I have on board people, the sweet talkers like Darlene, and I set Darlene to work to tell him, to explain to him, we really need to try and go to Dubiartok. But let's head out. We're heading out, and we get to Skerryvore. Skerryvore is the tallest lighthouse in Scotland. It's, 156 feet tall. Took 4 years to build, from 1838 to 1844, by Alan Stevenson. Alan was first of the Stevensons, and he also built and organized Bell Rock. So a very brilliant engineer in the end. The base of Skerryvore is only 42 feet, but the base stones, he calculated, from his engineering point, he calculated that the width of each stone that he put in here had to be 9.5 feet to withstand the storms that come to that corner of the world. From Skerryvore, we moved further east and he took us to Fingal's Cave. For those of you who are musicians or interested in music, Felix Mendelssohn loved this corner of the world, and his Hebridean suite includes a complete overture to Fingal's Cave. People could actually land. You can get boats that'll land you out there, and there's people who've climbed up the top. We did not. We kept going because our skipper had a certain spot he wanted to take us to, and he put on diving gear and went and dove and got scallops for us all. What a terrific treat that was. From that corner, we moved to Iona. Iona is an incredibly important place in the Christian world. The first pilgrims, missionaries, monks, I'm not quite sure what to call them, who came up the coast. They got here in 563 and built the first church. That church led to an abbey in 1200, but the tragedy is this was right in an area where the Vikings loved to raid. So over many years, the early settlements, the early churches were destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, and rebuilt. But it's just a most glorious spot to stay. Very close to there. Oh, and now before we get there, this is, very close there is the Dubiartok, and I'm going to move up here a little bit and pull in this. Dubiartok is one of the most isolated and wettest places for a lighthouse keeper to be. You'll notice that the front door is 40 feet in the air. You've got to land people, get them up. But the other thing here is this granite is some of the blackest and dirtiest black granite I've ever seen in my life, and the black comes off. This whole side of the lighthouse was been washed and washed and washed in the storms, and it was black. The other joy here is, in addition to our crew, is young lady Molly. Molly is probably the freest spirit of anybody I've ever met, in that Molly wanted no real possessions. She didn't want an apartment or a house. She just wanted a backpack and the clothes and things that fitted in there, and would go off on one adventure to the next. She had been off many times, spent quite a lot of time up in Iceland. I enjoy Iceland, so I enjoy talking about that. But I got to talk to Molly quite a bit. And Molly was more excited at getting to places like Skerryvore than anybody in our crew. I mean, Skerryvore was like a matchstick on the bow, ahead of the bow of the boat. She's already out there dancing. And I had to say, Molly, what is all this with you and Lighthouse and excitement? And she explained that she had actually been born into a family of lighthouse keepers. Her father was a lighthouse keeper, family were lighthouse keepers. Not only that, her grandmother was a lighthouse keeper. And in fact, she was the only female lighthouse keeper ever in Ireland. I said, oh, how did that come about? And she very calmly said, oh, she murdered a husband and a son, and they couldn't prove it, so they let us stay in the lighthouse and look after it for the next 10 years. A great lady, thoroughly enjoyed talking to him. From there, we went to a small island, and the Isle of Tyree. And one thing I had never really read much about before is shore stations. And it really hadn't occurred to me that lighthouse keepers would go to station on a lighthouse for 3 months, 3 months on, 3 months off, 3 months on, 3 months off. And they were miles from any town. So the Northern Lighthouse Board created shore stations. This one happens to be on the coast of, it's Heinisch on the coast of Tiree. But this here is their signal tower. Today on the signal tower is a radio mast. But years ago, it wasn't a radio mast. That was a flag tower. They didn't have cell phones or radios or any means of communication. You could only just with good binoculars see Skerryvore from this point. And now if you go off, it's your time to go off, your wife is about to deliver a new baby, you're desperate to know, did I get a son? Did I get a daughter? Is everything okay? So they had a system whereby if somebody's left and the baby comes after they've gone, the first thing you do in the morning, you either hoist a dress or a pair of pants. That was the way that the lighthouse folks got to know whether they had a son or a daughter. A little later, we came to Hebrides. Hebrides is where, after the Heinisch shore station was later abandoned and everything was moved to Hebrides, and this was the observation tower. It's made of cast iron sheets welded together. This thing wasn't going to move. But the other thing about Hebrides is, of the Stevenson family, the most famous and well-known person today is Robert Louis Stevenson, the author. He was actually the grandson of the first of the family. And in his book, Kidnapped, he shipwrecks his protagonist on Hebrides. So I enjoyed just walking the top of the island, and this shipwreck where they just there was nobody there, they didn't know how they were going to get out of there, but just imagining that story. We come towards the end of our boat trip, and Darlene has made good friends with Seven, which is, he is the only member of the crew that I haven't previously introduced you. But the trouble is, when you make good friends like that, he seems to think he owns your place at the dinner table. So Darlene had lost her dinner table and had to have a serious talk with Seven, I think. From here, we unfortunately had to leave our boat and travel north. And we flew, well, we got to Oban. Now, it's possible to take a road journey up north to Ullapool and then ferry across. But for the faster way for us, we got back to Oban, drove to Glasgow, and took a flight to Stornoway. Now, in Stornoway, there are lots of things we wanted to see, including several major lighthouses. So we're going to start around, and we will finish down here at Elanglass. But no, let's get on with going to Stornoway. Stornoway, a quiet town, not a very prosperous town, very much fishing based, it seemed. But we quickly got around to Arnish Point. Now, what date is Arnish Point? Arnish is 1853. This is also an Alan Stevenson lighthouse. From Arnish Point, I'd started to talk to our guide about shore stations. I was fascinated by the shore stations and what they had. I had previously not read much about them. And he said, there isn't a shore station here anymore, but I think I know where it was, and I think it's a small apartment building today. So we got there, and this building, and then what I loved was over the door, there is the sign for the Northern Lighthouse Board. It translates, this Latin quote translates for the safety of all. And I thought that this has stood there since 1899. It's still the building is still in use, obviously no longer as a shore station. Triumphant Head, built in 1900, this is the Davison Charles Stevenson Lighthouse. I thought this one, so many of these shore stations have been, so many of these lighthouses, the lighthouse keepers' cottages are made into holiday homes and interesting places. I felt this was a little strange, a little sad, and it had been converted into dog kennels. So you had this whole area of lovely old buildings and another newer building here, a dog for dogs and a cattery. In the northern part of Lewis, again, evidence of occupation going back to prehistoric times. This is the Callanish stones where they're lined up so that on midsummer morning, the sun comes up right down the line. This kind of part of history I just find very fascinating. The butt of Lewis. This is the lighthouse that I mentioned was, I've lost my, built in 1862, but I think for me the most interesting aspect here is the red brick. I don't think in my travels I've come across a lot of white lighthouses, a lot of granite, but I don't think I can name any other red brick lighthouse. And this was built by David and Thomas Stevenson way back in 1862. And it's the local, it is supposedly the windiest spot in the British Isles. Grahan Backhouse Village. This is how people lived up to 100 years ago. No longer living, this is now a museum, a nice restaurant. You can go into the houses, one or two of the houses, and see how they lived. Very dark, tiny windows, windows let in the cold. Peat fireplaces, very smoky, but very interesting. I just enjoyed going around and seeing them and seeing how these people live. So you've got show houses, you've got a restaurant, and you can actually rent, again, the possible cottages here. From here, we drove over the mountains to Elenglass and Scalping. This, at first blush, this is it's a 2-mile hike. It's one more of our hike. I'm sure the group probably were fed up with me and my hikes, but it wasn't an easy hike. It's muddy and wet, and fortunately they had put bits of new gravel down. But the real key here is not just the one lighthouse you see. The key here is this old building here. This lighthouse is really the complete story of the lighthouses of Scotland. In 1782, I have to just grab my notes here as I'll get it all messed up. In 1782, there were a series of terrible storms, and many ships were lost. And the merchants were really all over the Parliament saying, you really have to do something. You've got to get us, we can't just have the odd fire, the way of, the only form of lighthouses at that point in the late 1700s was fires, braziers and fires. They wanted something better. And they pushed Parliament. And finally, in 1786, Parliament made a decision that they would give the Northern Lighthouse Board the permission to build the first 4 lighthouses in the world that you and I know today. Not only did they give them the permission to build them, they also gave them the funding. They agreed that they could borrow money, they agreed they could build, and they agreed that they could levy shipping to pay for all this. But it's one thing to say go and build 4 lighthouses, but it was totally another thing to how were you going to light it? To this point, all we had was fires. They turned to an Edinburgh lamp maker, Thomas Smith. And they went to Thomas. He was a pretty innovative man, and he'd already made some reflector type lamps for homes. And they said, we want you to take this scale up and create this light, not this one, this lighthouse here, build it and develop a serious light. And that's exactly what he did. He built the first, it was a frame with a domed parabolic mirror and a whale oil lamp. And the amazing thing is, it could be, when it was properly finished, it could be seen 10 miles out. This was a huge, huge development. Now, Thomas Smith, many years, 10 years later, in 1799, met and married Jean. Jean was a widow. She'd been widowed many years. Her husband, unfortunately, was in the sugar trade. He'd taken a vessel to the Caribbean for sugar, and he caught a fever down there and died. And for the next 13 years, she and her children really struggled. But then she met Thomas Smith. And Thomas, when they met and married in 1799, Thomas Smith apprenticed her eldest son, 15-year-old Robert Stephenson. And it's Robert Stephenson that really founded the whole of the Stevenson Lighthouse empire that went for almost 150 years. At age 25, at age 19, he was already building lighthouses. At age 25, in 1824, he designed and built Island Glass. And not only that, he'd heard about the Fresnel brothers in Paris and what they were doing with lenses, and made sure that he got some of the first lenses for his lighthouse here. So this is really, we went from candles to a major light. Unfortunately, until it's now the original lens is long gone. In fact, the Fresnel lens from this lighthouse is now in London, in a museum in London, and they've gone to what I call LEDs, but I think the true word is Catropics sealed beam lights. So this location has gone from candles to sealed beam lights in a period of 200 years. And this, folks, brings me to the end of our journey, in that we left from there, flew back to Glasgow, had our farewell dinner in Glasgow, and everybody, unfortunately, had to depart for their homes. I suggest I stop sharing my screen at this point. I will do my best to answer questions. We have quite a lot of people here, so if we run out of questions, I'm more than happy to answer questions by email or phone. I would very much like to thank Northern Light Cruising for an incredible journey and seamanship, Mary for her designs, and the Lighthouse, US Lighthouse Society for giving me the chance. This was my very first lighthouse tour, and it has been a lot of fun. But at this point, I think, Jerry, I'm going to turn the host sharing back to you. I'll stop sharing my screen, and you can take it from there.
Great job, Chris. That was really, really interesting. Great job. And everybody, there's two different ways you can ask questions. You can ask questions in the chat, and we can pass them along to Chris, or you can raise your hand. For those of you who are used to Zoom, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't know, if you go to, on the bottom of your screen where it says participants, and you click on that, you should be able to then go over to the right and click where it says raise hand if you have a question. And if you do that, we can then see that you are raising your hand, and we can unmute you, and you can ask your question. So we can do it that way. I don't see any questions in the chat. Actually, we see in the chat we have the question, Chris, will the Outer Hebrides tour will be offered again? I guess that's also a question for Jeff.
That's really it is a Jeff question, but obviously in this day and age we're kind of locked down, and I already have 3 tours ready to go before I could go back to Scotland. I should have actually left today to go to Naples, Italy for the Italy-Sicily tour. After that, I'm going back to Greece, and I also have a Japan tour organized. But really, the scheduling of tours is very much comes from the head office, but happy to do it. I love that part of the world.
Okay. Anything you want to add to that, Jeff?
Yeah, we may not do this particular version of the trip that only really lets 12 people participate because of the size of the vessel. But we definitely offer more trips to Scotland and the islands. And one particular trip that we're talking about right now is bringing back our Northern Scotland trip that covers the Orkney and Shetland Islands, which is a fabulous tour.
I'm sure it is. Okay, we have a question from Roger. Let me unmute Roger here. Roger, you have a question?
I just wanted to say that this was fabulous. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I was just curious, the total number of guests that were on the trip.
Total number of guests is 12, and it was locked by the capacity of the boat. We couldn't on that. The problem with boat tours is it's very difficult to find. You can get boats of 2, 4, 6, 8, and maybe up to 12 or 14. Then there's this huge gap, and it's not economical to run boats of 20 people. It jumps to 30 or 40. I seriously, at one point, considered taking 2 vessels in that there's a sister ship in the same waters, the Elizabeth V. And it's seriously, at one point I thought, well, let's just take 2 boats, but we ended up not doing that. But
right, and I can chime in a little bit here too. That when Chris and I first started talking about this trip, I basically told Chris that this wasn't possible, and he took it on as a challenge. And he's done this a number of times where I've said it's been impossible to create a tour to this location. He's managed to do it. And if you look at the lay of the land, literally the only way to get to these islands and see these lighthouses is by vessel. So unfortunately, the maximum number of people with the crew and everything, the number of society members could be limited to only 12. But it's an unusual circumstance, and we don't do very many tours like that. But it's the logistics that dictated the limited number of people.
Okay. Jason has a question. Okay, whoops, just a second. Okay, Jason, you can go ahead.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and connoisseurs of the light. I want to thank you for championing this and making it happen. I really enjoyed it. I'm from Madison, New Jersey. I am fortunately landlocked, except for some lakes and rivers and streams. But I just want to say that my family and I have been exploring lighthouses in the Northeast mostly, and a couple Great Lakes the past 4.5 years. And last year we went, I sent a message to Mr. Gavin, and I don't know if Gavin can hear me or not, but I visited the Lighthouse Challenge in Maryland last year. It was fantastic. And yes, sir. Yes, awesome. I really, really enjoyed that. I just think what's fabulous about it is, I think this is preserving the past for the future, and I hope we continue to do that. I know everybody here is obviously very interested in doing that and continuing it. We've done the New Jersey Lighthouse Challenge. We've done the Mid-Coast Maine Lighthouse Challenge a couple of years ago, and we just try to explore different things. One thing from your video presentation here a moment ago, sir, was your reference to that one lighthouse that was under a bridge. And it reminded me of the Little Red Lighthouse under the GW Bridge in New York City. My family and I visited last Father's Day. So it's a great Father's Day present for anybody that's looking for ideas to get out and about.
Little Red Lighthouse and the Great Gray Bridge.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, again, I want to thank you all for making this happen. It's really interesting, especially in these crazy times of this. Everybody's shut in. Well, I'm not shut in, but for all I know, I probably have acquired immunity at this point. But I just and to that point, I want to say I'm been in the human healthcare field most of my adult life, and I hope each and every one of you are safe and your families are safe. and that you continue to be safe. And for the rest of us, let's get that herd immunity and get back to life and visiting lighthouses. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Concur with that. So let's see here. We have Jillian has a question. Jillian, you can go ahead.
Hi, I'm Gillian. Yes.
Jillian, sorry, it could be pronounced. Sometimes it's pronounced.
They're mostly Jillians, but I'm a Gillian.
Okay.
Thank you. This is great. I'm a historical novelist, and my current novel that I'm working on is set on a small fictional island in the Hebrides, and there's a lighthouse that is prominent. So this is wonderful because I can't get there to go right now. So two questions. One is if we would be able to see a written list of these places. I couldn't quite get the names of all of them. And the second was, what was the name of the place where there were the croft and the roundhouses and so on that are now a museum and restaurant and guest cottages?
Well,
And
Gillian,
Lewis, I think.
Gillian, thank you for your questions. First of all, if as a novelist, you and interested in that part of the world, you need to know about Peter May.
I do. I've read his books.
Well, that village, Garrigan Village, is very much the villages that you would find in Peter May's book. This book, I like his books, and that corner of the world will give that kind of book will give you an immense amount of information. Let me try and give you the spelling of that station because it's a very odd spelling. The name of that village is Gearrranan, Garanan Black House Village.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
And the name, how do I get you the, I would, probably the easiest way is if somebody at the US Lighthouse would give me your email address, I can just send you a copy of the notes I have, and it would list every lighthouse that we went to.
Also, on our website.
Oh, thank you.
On our website, if you go to the tours section, there's photographs from all of the tours that we've operated. Most of them are updated, but I know we have this one on there, and that lists in photographic form most of the lighthouses on there. And if I'm not mistaken, we might even have a tour map. But if we don't, we can email you anything that you need.
Oh, that's great. Also, I'm pretty sure that the little lighthouse at Fort Point under the Golden Gate Bridge is also red brick. I'm not positive, but I've just about run out of lighthouses in
that was an unusual circumstance in Scotland. There are a lot of red brick lighthouses in America.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Gillian. We have Gabby has a question. Okay, Gabby, you can go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for doing this tour. First of all, I'm a wheelchair user, and although I travel a lot, it would be impossible for me to do something like this. So being able to see the tour in this way is just amazing. So thank you for that. My question was, how many of the lighthouses in Scotland that you saw were you able to go inside of?
Very few. I think 4 or 5 at the maximum at that point. And even when you could get inside, unfortunately, the Fresnel lenses were mostly gone. Those active lighthouses were. This was more a historical tour of what Stevenson family had done. Yes, we did climb some lighthouses, but I always try and set a goal. When I create a tour, I'm looking for 20 to 30 lighthouses, and I want to try and get in at least half of them if I can. I didn't get into half of this tour. A lot of the doors are locked.
But that's actually an unusual situation, and it has a direct connection to the remoteness of these particular stations. So it's an unusual situation, but for most of our trips, we get into most of the lighthouses, and we balance it out because really our tours are photographic tours. They're all about getting you the best possible picture and access whenever possible. Whether it's by boat or by plane, you know, we have a lot of our tours nowadays, we're chartering helicopters and planes and all types of vehicles to get you out to these lighthouses for the photograph. But in the case of the Hebrides, getting you close enough to the lighthouse to take a picture from the water, in some cases, is going to be the best case scenario.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. My partner and I do hosting at the Cape Blanco Lighthouse here on the Oregon coast. And although I can't get up to the lens room, I can get into the workroom since they allowed us to bring a little mini ramp. So if anybody is ever out there in the month of August, please do come by and say hi at Cape Blanco.
It's a great lighthouse. I was there a few years ago. Okay, thank you, Gabby. And let's see here, Jerry R. has a question. Okay, you can go ahead, Jerry.
Yes, Jerry Risley is the name here in Punta Gorda, Florida. And I took many lighthouse tours years ago when I was living in Oklahoma, maybe 25 years ago. But anyway, I'm just kind of curious about Wayne Wheeler. You know, I used to see him at those tours. How is he doing, or what's he doing these days?
Jeff, you want to take that?
Yeah, Wayne's still very active with the organization. He was president for all these years since 1983. And just at the beginning of this year, became president emeritus. He's still writing. He still works with us on the Keeper's Log magazine. And he's currently writing a book. He's always working on a book. So he's now concentrating more on a book. And he gives lectures and is probably at the moment still one of the best resources for lighthouse history in the country. But Jeremy's catching up to him pretty quickly.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you.
There's other people.
And if anybody wants to contact Wayne, Jerry, if you want to contact him, I can go ahead and shoot you his email address or his information so you can make contact if you like.
I appreciate that, if you would. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. And we have, I don't know the first name, but T. Crutcher has a question. You can go ahead.
Hello, this is Tom, and just incidentally, I work in a 26-story tower in Louisville, Kentucky, which to my knowledge is the only lighthouse on the Ohio River. We have two lighthouses on the top of it that are active aids to navigation. They were obviously built just to be interesting, but they are active aids to navigation, as well as planes line up on them to come into the airport. But the question I missed out on here, are there any occupants in these islands on a permanent basis that you visited, or are all of them abandoned now as far as any permanent residents?
There are islands that have population, and it varied substantially by location. In that, as you get closer to the main coast of Scotland, there are several small communities, but once you get into the outer islands, the islands of Lewis, Paris, and all the way down to Mingulay, I can only think of two significant communities. But there are people who want to go back and live the simple crofter lifestyle. We even know of one man who, as an adult, said, I'm going to go and live that lifestyle. But the population is very small on the outer islands. As you get closer to the mainland, yes, there are quite a few people.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Tom. And I don't see any other questions. I don't see any other hands up. And I'm looking in the chat. I had somebody who said they couldn't figure out how to raise their hand, and I'm waiting to see if there's a question, but I don't see any outstanding questions right now. So we've gone over a little over an hour at this point. Does anybody else have any questions?
I see one more just coming up from Gillian.
Oh, I see a question. Yeah, Gillian. Okay, let me unmute you, Gillian. And okay, you can go ahead.
Thank you. What are the names of those two little communities that you just mentioned?
On the Outer Hebrides?
Hmm.
Oh my goodness. I'm afraid I'd have to go. I can picture them, but I can't mentally do it. I grew up in the UK, but I have lived for the last 50 years in the United States. So my local knowledge, I'm afraid, is definitely fading.
I'll find them. Thank you.
Okay, Muriel Davison has a comment, and I just unmuted you, Muriel, if you'd like to go ahead and speak.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet Jeremy and Jeff finally in person, sort of. I'm president of the Tremont Historical Society, and we in Tremont, Maine, on Mount Desert Island, and we stamp passports for the U.S. Lighthouse Society for the Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse. So I just wanted to say hi.
Thank you, Muriel. Nice to meet you. Thank you for taking part today.
Actually, my brother's on this too, and he is active, or was active, in the lighthouse in Rockland, Maine. Ryan Trask.
Oh, okay. That name sounds very familiar to me. The Breakwater Light in Rockland?
The Breakwater Light.
Yeah, I've walked out to that many times. Okay, thank you, Muriel.
Like Darlene Chisholm has a question.
Okay, give me a second, Darlene. Let me find you and unmute you here.
And we mentioned the passport program. We've lately been creating special passport stamps for all of our tours. International ones that sometimes don't have stamps at the lighthouses, we create them for those who are able to see them on the tours. So that's kind of a new thing we've been doing.
Yeah. Okay, Darlene, you are unmuted. You can go ahead.
Hey, Chris, you did an awesome job of this. It was an awesome trip.
Yeah.
And your notes are on the website. If you go to the tours
Yeah.
and click and you got the notes, it's got a list of all the lighthouses right there. So see that way. And also, Jeff, if we're doing the Northern Scotland trip, I want to get to Mugga Flugga.
I will get you to Mugga Flugga.
That's maybe my favorite lighthouse name of all time.
All I have to do is tell Chris it's impossible and he'll make it happen.
That's right.
I want to get there. Yes, yes.
I love it when Jeff tells me it's impossible, and that I hope we're able to continue with this series, because the next one I would like to do is Alaska. And I can remember my first, my wife is trying to interrupt me here, but I want to do Alaska, and that Jeff kept telling me we couldn't get there. It's so impossible to get ourselves around there. And that is a lighthouse trip where we did a lot of flying.
Oh yeah, it was awesome.
I see 3 more hands up, Jerry.
You do?
I've got David Rosenblum, Jason, and Keith.
Okay, sorry, I was in the wrong screen there. Okay, David is next. David, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Great program, really enjoyable. Last May, Linda and I were in Scotland on our 3rd trip over many years. And we discovered something that is easy to get to and really is a must. It's the Scottish National Lighthouse Museum. It's in Fraserburgh. It's at Kinnaird Head, which is
the Museum of Scottish Lighthouse.
Right. It's a great place to learn about the Stevensons. It really is fabulous.
You went there, Jeff, right?
And it's easy to get to. You can actually drive there right to the and they will take you on a tour of the lighthouse, which is working. It's built in a castle, which is unusual.
The Kinnaird Head Lighthouse.
Yes,
that's correct.
It's in Fraserburgh, which is a major port. It's the most northeast city in Aberdeenshire.
When we went on our last tour, we went to Scotland and England with Jeremy. Some of the people on this call were on that trip, and some of us arrived early to drive specifically up to that museum. And I had rented a passenger van that I was going to drive a few hours to get there. And when we all checked into the car rental company, the only thing they had available was first of all, it's a right-hand drive stick-shift mini coach. And with jet lag and everything, and my inexperience with that vehicle, thank God my wife was there keeping me awake.
you're a brave man to drive on the wrong side of the road. That
All the passengers who I was taking were brave.
I was kind of sorry I didn't arrive early enough in the tour to go with you, but when I found out about that long drive, I don't know, I was maybe not that sorry. But I just interviewed 2 people at the Museum of Scottish Lighthouses for the podcast. So that'll be coming up in a few weeks. Yeah, I interviewed them via Zoom, and they were so nice. I had such a good time talking to them. Yeah.
Yeah, they gave us behind the scenes tour of the whole museum. When our small group went there, we got to see all of the warehouse section, all of the acquisition area, and anybody from the Lighthouse Society who goes to visit that particular museum, give us a heads up, and we'll give them a good word, and they'll give you the behind the scenes tour also.
Yeah, they're the nicest people. They were so nice when I interviewed them. Let's see, we have.
David has another question, Jeremy.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Jason.
What's that? Oh, Jason.
Jason?
Yeah. No, sorry. David.
Oh, David, did you know you're all set? Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Jason.
We've done 4 trips to the UK over the years, and each time we've driven. And it's not difficult, particularly if you have a great navigator, which Linda is, and reminds you when you hit the roundabouts. She says 3 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and I just say yes, ma'am. And it works.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, David. And Jason has another question or comment. You can go ahead.
Jeremy, how do you pronounce your last name?
D'Entremont.
D'Entremont. And are you with the US Lighthouse Society?
I am.
Okay, all right, because I'm just trying to get to know people because I'm kind of new. And so I just want to thank you and Mr. Gales. I presume you and Christopher, you guys are also with the Lighthouse Society?
Yes.
You all are like the 3 musketeers of everything Lighthouse. And,
well, there's actually a lot of people who are chimed in here who are part of the society. David and Linda Rosenblum are volunteers with the society as well. And Darlene and Tom Chisholm, who've been on dozens of tours, are also volunteers with the society. So there's a whole host of people who you can't see at the moment who are help us keep the engine running.
I thank you all. I mean, it's really amazing what you do, and it's nice to put a face to a name who otherwise I do not know. Is anyone aware of any challenges? Anybody doing any challenges or any excursions across anywhere in the United States or the Great Lakes this coming summer?
At this point, I think everything's pretty much on hold.
Yeah.
Anything that's being planned has been canceled at the moment. So unfortunately, this year looks like it's going to be a wash, right, Jeremy?
Pretty much everything's either canceled or on indefinite hold. The only lighthouse I know of that's open to any degree is St. Augustine, is open at like 25% capacity. But I'm hearing almost every day, I'm hearing of another lighthouse or event that's canceled. So I don't think
somebody asked the question on the chat about when we're going to offer Ireland next. We were actually supposed to operate our Ireland tour, which is going to be an amazing trip this year in July. And the way the quarantine restrictions are in Ireland currently, as soon as you land, you have to do a mandatory 2-week quarantine. So that kind of rules out doing a tour to Ireland, unless you want to spend your time in a 2 weeks. So with those types of restrictions in Europe and even in the United States, we're forced to look at what we're doing with our tours, how we might have to postpone a lot till next year, and any type of group events like challenges are all most likely going to be postponed, in my opinion.
But what about, okay, fair enough. What about on an individual basis? Like if my family and I want to get out and explore more lighthouses in the Northeast where we are, I mean, are these places going to at least be open so that we can, look at them or visit the grounds?
It's too early to tell right now.
What was that, Jeff?
I said it was I think it's with regard to individual lighthouses. I think it's too early to tell when they're actually going to be open. I would assume that they would be open you know, openings will step up. But right now, most lighthouses are closed.
Well, the grounds at some are open. It depends, you know, it's a case by case kind of thing. But like I'm very involved with Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse here in New Hampshire, and it's on a Coast Guard station, and the Coast Guard station is closed to the public right now. So Portland Headlight in Maine, the park just reopened after being closed for a while, but the museum at the lighthouse is closed. So you can go look at it, but that's about it.
Yeah, I guess it's the type of tour you want to go on. If you want to do a photographic tour and try to get some good photos, and access isn't an issue, then you can pretty much drive everywhere. But if you actually want to access lighthouses and get inside the museums and, you know, make donations, get your passport stamped, that might be an issue.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I think we're gonna have to wrap things up pretty soon because the meeting officially goes, or the event, I should say, goes until 1/2 the hour. That's about 5 minutes from now. And then we all turn to pumpkins. So we have Keith has a question. So Keith, you can go ahead.
Hello, I'd like to say hello to you all from England, because I'm a member of the Association of Lighthouse Keepers. And I'd like to say hello to Jeff, because at the same time as this tour took place in 2015, I actually visited the US myself and did a great tour. I went to Pennsylvania, San Diego, and up to Seattle, where I met Jeff, and Jeff very kindly took me around to see a lot of lighthouses there. In fact, on that 30-day tour, I did over 50 lighthouses, which was quite good. Anyway, so there we are. So it's good that you're going to come over here again. Maybe we can meet up. Ireland is a very interesting place. If you want to come, I've circumnavigated Ireland with John Eagle, who passed away a year ago, sadly. He ran some interesting tours, and so there we are. And I've been to Scotland and various other places. And of course, what you really need to do is come down to the south coast of England and to Hurst Castle, spelled slightly different to your Hurst Castle. And we've got the Lighthouse Museum, which I've developed since 2006. But of course, like Jeff says, everywhere's sharp at the moment. So very nice to meet you. And also Chris Brookes. I received your email at Christmas. I have replied to you today, in fact. I don't see you today, tell you more about what I've been up to. So perhaps we'll chat again on that one. It's nice to see your face. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm just replying to somebody. Somebody's asking me if the cat bites. No, not actually. I just thought you'd all like to meet Eddie here. He's just woken up from a nap, so he's very sedate right now, which is actually a pretty unusual thing.
Aww.
So again, it's 3 minutes from pumpkin time here. So thank you so much for taking part in our first presentation of this type. And again, I apologize to those people who tried to get into this and couldn't. And I
don't think people who couldn't get in are listening.
What's that, Jeff?
The people who couldn't get in aren't listening.
That's true, but if they see this online, they'll be listening.
Right.
That's true. Yeah, we are sorry to anybody who couldn't access the our first presentation. You know, we had over 350 people register, so you lucky 100 were the guinea pigs. Now we'll do better the next time, and each time we do it, it'll get better.
I see a thumbs up from Jason there. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Take care. We'll see you again.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you, Chris. It was great.
Thank you, Chris.
You're very welcome.
Take care, everybody.
It'll all disappear in a minute.